He is the 51st Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the first African-American independently elected to statewide office in Kentucky's history, and the first Republican elected to the Attorney General's office since 1948. Now he wants to be the next governor of Kentucky, but he'll have to win a crowded primary before likely taking on Governor Beshear in the fall. Attorney General Daniel Cameron is my guest tonight on Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition.
These new scratch-offs from the Kentucky Lottery will get you moving.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Attorney General Daniel Cameron, my guest tonight. Thank you for being in Hazard this time.
Thank you for being here and or having me here. Appreciate it immensely. Yeah.
We've done a couple virtually, but glad to have you in person here in Hazard. Let's jump right into this governor's race. And you were one of the last to get in, I believe, and you knew it was going to be a crowded field when you got in. So I'm just wondering why you decided to jump in the governor's race instead of decide to run for another term as Attorney General.
Well, we got in last May, and we felt very strongly, when I talk about we, it's myself and my wife, Mackenzie, felt very strongly about the things that we've done over these last 3 years to stand up for folks' constitutional rights and for the values of the men, women, and children of all 120 counties. And as we looked at the field, we thought it's one thing to run on ads, it's another thing to run on a record. And we've demonstrated, whether it's getting churches reopened in Kentucky, getting a travel ban found unconstitutional that the governor tried to institute, whether it's getting the vaccine mandates from Washington, D.C. stopped, or bringing in nearly $900 million into Kentucky for the opioid epidemic. We're running on a record and want to make sure that folks know that that is the type of leadership that we want to bring to the table and help restore the conservative values that I think the men, women, and children of all 120 counties want to see in their governor. And we have had the ability, again, over these last 3 years to stand up for those values, whether it's against Governor Beshear or the Biden administration in Washington, D.C.
If you could pick one thing as your biggest accomplishment as Attorney General, what would you say it was?
Well, I think daily we have tried to make sure we stand up for the constitutional rights of our citizens. And I'm proud of the work that we did on a bipartisan basis to bring this nearly $900 million into the state to fight the opioid epidemic. Obviously, fentanyl has hit our people hard. We lost 2,250 individuals to overdoses here in Kentucky based on the most recent report from the Office of Drug Control Policy. That's too many. That's folks that aren't at the dinner table with their families. That's loved ones that have been lost. That's potential that has not been reached. And fentanyl, we know, was attributed to 70% of that. So we've got to do everything we can. Not only have we brought in this money to the state to fight the opioid epidemic, we've also filed lawsuits against the Biden administration to hold them accountable for their failures at the southern border, because we know how fentanyl is making it into Kentucky. We know it's coming, it's being made, manufactured in China, being trafficked through Mexico, and it comes into our communities and hurts our people. So I'm proud of the work that we've done to bring that money in, to fight the Biden administration, to end the vaccine mandates, to get churches reopened in Kentucky, to make sure that we close the abortion facilities, which we've done since August of last year because of the work of our office to defend the pro-life legislation that was passed by our General Assembly. So there are a lot of things that we feel strongly that we've done a good job on and are going to continue to work hard. And that's why I say that it's important not only to run ads, but to run on a record. And substantively, we have done things to fight daily for the men, women, and children of all 120 counties.
Speaking of fentanyl, you've been traveling across the state holding these town halls. What have you learned from those that you didn't know already?
Well, we know that there's a lot of heartache and heartbreak across Kentucky with folks that have lost lives and families that have been impacted by that. But what I've been encouraged by is the number of people in communities, whether it's the eastern part of our Commonwealth, or the west or central Kentucky or northern Kentucky, who want to come together to fight this. And not only do they want to share their stories, but they also want to share in helping restore hope to our communities. And what I hope people get out of these Operation Fight Fentanyl forums is the fact that we want to break down silos and create intersections of communication where folks know what different stakeholders and communities are doing and how we can better partner together to fight and push back against this epidemic.
Now, fair or not, your term will always be criticized by some for your handling of the Breonna Taylor case. I know we talked a lot about that the last time you were on, but I'm wondering about your reaction to the recent DOJ investigation that found the Louisville, Jefferson County Metro government and the police department had patterns of unlawful practices. Did you agree with the findings?
Well, that's something obviously that the Department of Justice undertook. It's not uncommon for them to undertake pattern and practice investigations. They've done so in Memphis and Detroit and other cities as well, and they decided to do one in Louisville, Kentucky. But I'm proud of the work that we did on the investigation that was separate from this pattern and practice investigation that the DOJ did. If you'll recall, what we were tasked with doing was looking into or taking into question what happened the night at Miss Taylor's apartment when she was killed. And I know there were a lot of narratives out there, but at the end of the day, the facts are what they are. And our team did a terrific job of investigating that case, and it was career prosecutors and investigators that looked at this case. Again, it was a tragedy. I haven't talked to anybody in the Commonwealth that doesn't recognize what happened to Miss Taylor was a tragedy. But that said, we have a responsibility in the Attorney General's office to stand up for the law and to apply the facts of the case to the law, and that is what we did. And that's why I talk about leadership is important, because you have to do what's right regardless of what people might say about you and regardless of the talking heads on CNN or MSNBC might say about you or the far left might say about you. We have a responsibility to do what's right by the law. You need a fighter that is willing to stand up and take the slings and arrows and be in the arena. And I think we've demonstrated that over these last 3 years.
You know, looking back, you have no regrets on anything that happened with that investigation.
I'm proud of the work that our office did in terms of investigating what happened that night. Obviously, there was a separate investigation that the Department of Justice did as it relates to the obtaining of that warrant. That was something that was separate from us looking at what happened that night that she was killed. I'm proud of the work that our office did.
Ad supporting one of your opponents, Kelly Craft, has called you a, quote, establishment teddy bear who hasn't been tough enough in challenging President Biden's border policies, which you've already mentioned. Your response to those ads that she's running?
Well, it's the first attack that I've heard where I've been called a teddy bear. It's pretty comical. But look, you know, in a campaign, especially if you're the front runner, somebody is going to attack you. Now, all the other candidates in this race have refrained from attacking. It's unfortunate that Kelly and her supporters have decided to go that route. But again, you understand when you're in leadership, you will take the slings and arrows that come along with being a leader and being a fighter. And that's no difference here now. All I can say is look at my record, and the record is clear that I've been fighting the Biden administration. When the vaccine mandates were being threatened here on Kentucky, no one went to Kelly Craft and asked her to fight the vaccine mandates. They came to our office and we fought those mandates and we got those halted in Kentucky. No one went to Kelly Craft or her supporters to make sure that we closed down the abortion facilities in Kentucky. They came to our office. We did that work. When it came to bringing money into state to fight the opioid epidemic, we brought money in to the tune of nearly $900 million. And we fought Governor Beshear. When he shut down churches, we fought him, went into federal court, and after 9 days got churches reopened in Kentucky. So I've been fighting the good fight on behalf of the men, women, and children of all 120 counties over these last 3 years. I think most folks recognize that, is that we've been fighting for their values against these big interests that are coming out of Washington, D.C., these far left interests that are trying to creep into our schools and into our communities. We're fighting for the values of the men, women, and children of all 120 counties, and we're going to continue to do so.
Do you believe you are the front runner in this case? I know you put out polling a while back showing you had a significant lead, but do you still believe you're the front runner right now?
I certainly believe that we're working really hard to continue and to maintain our position as a leader in this race. And I believe that we are the front runner, and I believe that's what Kelly Craft and others in her team recognize as well, because I'm the only one that's being attacked in this race, and there's a reason for that. It's because they see that I'm the front runner and they're trying to knock my numbers down. But again, we are running on a record, and some are running on ads, and Kelly and her team have decided to do that. That's okay. At the end of the day, our main mission has to be to beat Andy Beshear in November. And I think whether it's being endorsed by President Trump, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, Kentucky Right to Life, or over 100 law enforcement officers, we have got the breadth of a coalition that can build a movement to not only win in May, but also to win in November. Again, we, at the end of the day, have to recognize our mission is to retire Andy Beshear for the governor's office.
So you'll support anybody, if you do not win, you'll support any Republican against?
I'll certainly support the Republican nominee. This is bigger than one candidate. This is about making sure that there is somebody in the governor's office that understands our values. And the governor that we have right now doesn't understand those values. If he did, he wouldn't have picked winners and losers during the midst of COVID. He wouldn't have shut down our schools for nearly 2 years. Now we're experiencing the ramifications of that because of the learning loss that we're seeing. And when the Department of Justice labeled parents domestic terrorists because they cared about the curriculum that their children were learning and they went to their school boards to complain, our governor was silent. He said nothing. And as the Biden administration and others try to destroy our fossil fuels industry, again, he is silent. Kentuckians need a leader and a governor who will stand up for them and will fight for their interests. And I hope I've demonstrated that over these past 3 years, I will do that.
Well, speaking of fossil fuels, I have to ask you about this other ad that Kraft is running, accusing you of allowing a coal-fired power plant in West Virginia to close that contributed to power to Kentuckians. What's the story behind that, and is that ad false?
Well, it is false, and she, again, and her team have just decided to lie and make up things. The two things that I'll point to is, one, that plant is in West Virginia. Two, that plant is not closed. The argument that we were making before the Public Service Commission is that West Virginia wanted us to pay for that plant. Any leader in Kentucky would say that Kentucky should not be paying for a plant in West Virginia. We don't want our utility rates to go up because of that. The interesting thing about that is not only that we make that argument, but KIUC, the Kentucky Industrial Utilities Council, made that argument as well. Alliance Coal, which is owned by Joe Kraft, is a member of KIUC, made the exact same position as us. And so it's highly ironic that all of a sudden, during the midst of a campaign that Kelly and her team are running this, when Joe Kraft and Alliance Coal made the same argument as members of KIUC.
It's almost like she's saying she's a bigger friend of coal than you are.
Well, look, again, I've been in the trenches over these last 3 years fighting to preserve our coal industry. The environmental social governance movement, which is a movement that has been cultivated by the left and been enabled by the Biden administration, essentially is trying to preclude the use of money to invest in coal and natural gas companies. That would devastate our economy. And I've been fighting tooth and nail on this issue along with Treasurer Allison Ball as well. So I've been fighting diligently to preserve our coal industry and our natural gas industry. And again, regardless of whether Kelly Kraft or her team says anything about us, we are going to continue to do the work that Kentuckians expect us to do. Again, we've been fighting hard and are going to continue to do that.
Let's talk about some legislation moving through the General Assembly that's gotten a lot of attention. Senate Bill 150. Some have called it anti-transgender. It could actually lead to suicides among transgender youth. You've said you would sign that bill. Why?
Well, I'd sign that bill because I want to look out for the interests of our children here in Kentucky. And a lot of what we've seen from the far left on this has been gaslighting, to be frank. This bill will put us in line with a lot of European countries that have already made the case that these procedures should not happen to minors. We have to, in Kentucky, put our hand up and say enough. Enough with this far left ideology that is trying to creep into Kentucky, that's trying to take over our children, that is trying to take over our schools. Jason Glass, the commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Education, just recently said that if you are a teacher and have some concerns about the gender ideology that is creeping its way into our schools, if you're a teacher and are concerned about that, you need to find another job. My message is to him is that he needs to find another job and that Andy Beshear needs to find another job. And we're going to continue to work hard over the course of this campaign to make sure people know that there's not a dime's bit of difference between Jason Glass and Andy Beshear when it comes to caring about gender ideology and the issues that a lot of Kentuckians do not agree with.
So you think Jason Glass needs to go?
I 100% agree that anyone that tells a teacher that they need to find a new job because they express some concern about gender ideology that is making its way into our schools, he absolutely needs to go.
Well, one thing your opponent, Kelly Craft, has been promoting is she would dismantle the Kentucky Department of Education. What do you think about that?
Well, I certainly think we need to have a Kentucky Department of Education that reflects the values of the men, women, and children of all 120 counties. And I've put out an education framework to the same point, which says that we need to have a Kentucky Department of Education that is opposed to the woke ideology that is trying to creep into Kentucky. We need to make sure that we increase the starting pay for our teachers because we value the work that they are doing. We need to get rid of some of the bureaucracy and the paperwork that they have to do that breaks up the relationship between them and the student. And finally, we need a Board of Education that recognizes the need of parents to be involved in education and recognize that our schools are for learning, reading, writing, and math and skills to prepare them to be productive citizens, and our schools shouldn't be breeding grounds for far-left ideology.
There's been a lot of talk about drag shows in this General Assembly session. Never thought I would say that, but do you think drag shows should be banned in public?
Well, I certainly think that in terms of keeping our children safe, if the idea and the view is to keep children safe from some of these things, that I certainly recognize the important work that the legislature was doing on this. Obviously, I think they're still working on that bill, and if I have an opportunity as the next governor, we'll certainly work on them to fashion something that protects children, because at the end of the day, I think that's what our legislature wants to do, is keep our children safe from these far-left ideologies that are trying to come into Kentucky. We don't need the values of California creeping into the Commonwealth. We need to stand firm on our values and our interests, and you need to have a governor that understands that, much in the same way you see Governor DeSantis in Florida or Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas fighting for the values of their state. I want to do that here in Kentucky. We need to build an alliance of governors that respects and values the interest of the people of their states, but also pushes back against this extreme ideology that's trying to come into our respective states.
Let's move to medical marijuana. I want you to tell us your position on that, and would you sign the bill that has passed the Senate and by the time this airs on Monday may be out on the governor's desk?
Well, look, here's what I've said from the beginning, is that there right now, based on legislation that was passed in the 22 session, there is an effort being undertaken at the University of Kentucky to study medical marijuana. That study is not completed, and I think we need to, obviously hear from them. In addition to that, if the bill that goes through has the support of our law enforcement community, meaning they recognize that it can be regulated in such a way that we don't have the concerns. One of the big concerns that I have right now, and I know a lot of folks in the law enforcement community have, is this idea that fentanyl can be laced with marijuana. And I don't want to put our law enforcement or our kids in jeopardy of getting a hold of something that might be laced with fentanyl, because we know that it can cause an overdose with just a trace amount that could fit underneath your fingernail. And so if our law enforcement community feels comfortable with the way in which it can be regulated, then I could see myself signing something. But again, I think it's important that we not only have, and look, I understand, I've talked to veterans and I've talked to others who recognize and understand the therapeutic benefit to marijuana. With that said, I think our law enforcement community needs to be actively involved in this discussion, needs to be a part of it. If they feel comfortable that it can be utilized in a way that can be regulated well, if they feel comfortable with that, I could sign something that gives folks that need relief the relief that they seek.
So it sounds like you're not sure if you would sign this or not yet.
Well, again, it would be based on conversation with our law enforcement community, making sure those stakeholders at the table. But again, if they are comfortable with something, I could sign that.
Should sports betting be legalized in Kentucky?
Well, sports betting is something that I think, I didn't grow up with sports betting. I grew up in E-Town, Hardin County. It wasn't something that was second nature to me, but I understand that there is a monetary component that could come into our state. Again, if it can be well regulated, I know our legislature is working on it, I could sign that.
Okay. You received, and I think you already mentioned, the endorsement of former President Donald Trump. Are you proud of that endorsement from someone facing several investigations right now and somebody who could eventually be indicted?
Well, look, whether it's President Trump or Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, or Kentucky Right to Life, or over 100 law enforcement officials and some members of our state legislature, I'm grateful for the endorsement. I think what it says about our campaign is that we have a campaign that can build a coalition that is large enough to not only win in May. Obviously, the Republican Party is a big tent, but whether it's President Trump or Kentucky Right to Life, or Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, or again, those 100 law enforcement officials, I think it demonstrates that we have the ability to build that coalition that can win in November, because that is our ultimate mission. And I'm very grateful for the endorsements that I've received. Again, I think it speaks to the ability for this campaign in particular to bring a lot of Republicans together to win in November.
Indicted or not, do you hope someone other than Donald Trump is the Republican nominee in 2024?
I support President Trump's race to win the nomination for the Republican Party. You know, if for some reason he didn't, obviously it's the same thing. If I'm not the Republican nominee for governor here in Kentucky, I will support the ultimate nominee, but I'm supporting Donald Trump in his race to be the nominee for the Republican Party.
You would have no problem campaigning for him, bringing him to Kentucky?
Look, you know, a lot of your viewers understand that when it came to the Republican Party, he brought a lot of working men and women into this party and understood the plight of a lot of folks that were struggling, whether it be with the opioid addictions or the overdoses that come from that, whether it be with the tax policies or not feeling like they had a seat at the table. And there are a lot of folks that watch this program and folks all across Kentucky that appreciate his willingness to stand up for folks that didn't have a voice. And I appreciate that as well. And again, support his run to be the nominee for the Republican Party.
I think there's also a lot of people that have serious concerns about him, and especially what he did on January 6th. Do you not think he had a role in what happened on January 6th?
Well, look, I think that whether it's January 6th, you know, there's obviously a lot of focus and attention on that. But no one seems to recall that during the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, there were people destroying whole cities across the country. And the liberal media and the far left media did not say anything about that. And so obviously, you know, January 6th, obviously what we saw at our Capitol was concerning. But to say that was challenging, but not say anything about what was happening across this country as people were literally trying to burn down cities, I think it's important that we talk about that just as well.
Do you not agree with things that were being during these Black Lives Matter protests? Do you not think they should have happened? Do you not agree with things they were protesting against?
Well, I don't think folks should be burning down cities, and I think we saw a lot of that across the country. And obviously, you know, our First Amendment is important. If you have something to say, you should be able to say it. But at the same time, you shouldn't be destroying property and destroying buildings to get a point across.
Would you say, looking back on Governor Beshear's term, that he's been a bad governor?
I would say that he's been a governor that doesn't understand the values of Kentucky. Again, if he understood the values, he wouldn't have picked winners and losers during the midst of the pandemic. He wouldn't have told folks who they were essential and who was non-essential. He wouldn't have shut down schools for nearly 2 years. Because of that, we are still feeling the effects and ramifications of it. He wouldn't have told people to stay at home and to get on unemployment insurance or unemployment benefits when the system that he created or was ahead of was broken. A lot of folks didn't get checks and felt, or if they got checks, they have still not felt the need to go back into the workforce. Because of actions that he undertook, we have one of the most abysmal workforce participation rates in the country. We've got to get these things back in order. We've got to make sure that we have a governor that understands our values and is going to fight for the interest of our state. You know, he's literally radio silent when it comes to an administration in Washington, D.C. that wants to destroy the coal and natural gas industry, that wants to push these gender ideologies and these woke ideologies into our schools. He's been silent on the border, even though we know that fentanyl is coming across the border. So again, we need leadership that's going to stand up for the values of all 120 counties.
Well, I think even you would agree he's had a pretty busy first term with 2 major natural disasters, including the flooding here in eastern Kentucky. How do you feel about the state and federal response to the flood?
Well, obviously, I think that when it comes to the federal government, I think as I've heard from folks here in this area in particular, there's concerns about FEMA and the money that's coming to folks that have had damage to their homes and the repairs, and so I think that certainly needs to be better. And then when you look at the state, when you see that particularly the West Kentucky Tornado Fund, money wasn't even going to where it needed to go, and so I think we need to shore up some of the response from our state government as well. But there's more work to be done, and if I'm fortunate to be governor, the folks here can count on me to fight hard and for their interest and to making sure that they get the money that they deserve and making sure that they've got a governor that is there with them every day.
Unfortunately, we just had another mass school shooting in Tennessee, just to our south. President Biden is again calling for an assault weapons ban. I know you're against that. But what would you do as governor to stop gun violence in this country?
Well, we got to make sure we have resource officers at every school, and they have to be funded. And it is painful and heartbreaking to see what happened in Nashville. Mackenzie and I have a 14-month-old at home, and you just think about sending a kid once able to go to school, sending them out into an environment. Look, I will tell you that when you saw that, you just think about all the sin and brokenness that is in this world. And a couple of days ago, the Wall Street Journal had an article talking about whether it's faith, whether it's community, whether it's family, all the indicators in this country are going the wrong way. And I think we've got to have a serious and frank conversation about restoring faith, restoring God into our institutions and into our conversations, because we need a revival. In the same way that we saw a revival at Asbury University here recently, we need a revival in this country. And I want to be a governor that is a part of that. But we have got to make sure that we have school resource officers at every education institution in this Commonwealth, and I'm going to push for that. I know that that is something that has obviously been worked on with the legislature, but we need to make sure there's enough funding there to ensure that there are RSOs at every school.
Would you be willing to look at any type of gun control legislation, red flag laws, anything?
Well, we believe in the Second Amendment here, and take the words in our Second Amendment earnestly. And I don't think that red flag laws, in fact, if some of the reporting that we've seen out of Nashville is that, this person was, receiving mental health. She, bought the firearms legally. And so I don't think there's anything different about the laws that would have changed what happened. What needs to change is that, again, we need to have a real conversation in this country about faith, about restoring God within our schools and within our institutions, because I think a lot of the issues that we have are related to the fact that we just don't value. You have people in this country that are okay with killing children in a womb, and it is unfortunate that we see that. It's unfortunate that we see this ideology that tells you that you're not man or woman, and we've got to have an honest and frank conversation about that.
Only about 30 seconds left. Why should Eastern Kentuckians specifically choose you, someone that probably hasn't spent a lot of time in Eastern Kentucky, but why should they choose you in just a few weeks?
Well, they should choose me because I've been standing up for the men, women, and children of all 120 counties and been fighting hard for the men, women, and children of all 120 counties. Folks don't care what you look like, they care about your values. And I've, again, been fighting for those values. I've been fighting for the constitutional rights. I'm running on a record and not on ads. And I hope folks will recognize that we've been taking the slings and arrows that come along with leadership and will continue to do so if I'm given the opportunity to serve as governor.
All right. No, it's going to be a busy few weeks. Attorney General Daniel Cameron, appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Issues and Answers.